Welcome to the Live Alive podcast.
We're recording.
I like how you're just speaking directly into the weird.
I know.
So
I couldn't find another mic, so.
welcome to this mini episode of Live Alive, where we just saw Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary on Mr. Rogers, and we're sitting in my car on the side of a hill, and we're going to talk about it. And by we, I mean I'm Dylan.
I'm Deanna.
I'm Mia.
And I'm Jeremy.
So guys and gals,
Thank you for that.
you're welcome. Not a lot of dry eyes at the end of that movie.
No.
Not.
Or in the middle, or in the beginning.
But especially the
Or
end.
when we watched the trailer before we went to see it.
That's true.
Well, wait,
warm up.
did y'all actually cry tears?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Especially at the end.
I would say I achieved misty-eyed.
Is that, like, big for you? Or, like we have to know the scale?
I can get misty-eyed pretty quick.
Okay.
But I was definitely there for multiple moments throughout the movie. Full-on, like, ugly crying, that takes a lot to get me there.
When was the last time you ugly cried in a movie?
Man. I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
I
I kind of thought it might happen in this one.
Yeah.
Because the trailers, I was like, oh, man. Every time I watched the trailer, it was misty, and that was just the trailer. And I didn't, like, I don't know if you guys grew up watching Mr. Rogers. Did anybody?
did. Yeah.
You did? I remember watching some, but I wasn't, like, huge Mr. Rogers, like, affinity. But I remember for the Live Alive podcast, before I had seen the trailer, and I was like, this is, like, the best movie trailer I've ever seen. Like, every time I probably watched it 10 times. Like, every time I watch it, I'm just, like, pumped to see this movie and, like, moved by this guy's life. And it made me do, like, a deep dive into Mr. Rogers, which then we ended up talking about on one of the episodes. So we were saying, like, when the movie comes out, we definitely got to go see it and talk about it. So let's talk about it, guys.
Okay.
What are some thoughts? What's something that was impactful from this little documentary?
One was that, you know, he really stuck with his beliefs. He knew what he believed, and he was even capable of changing his beliefs, but not from, like, popular culture or anything else. And I think it's pretty profound. I don't know who does that these days. I'm trying to think, like, who actually is an outcast because they choose to stick to what they think is right and doesn't, at least just a little bit, you know, give up what they think to be more marketable or be more, you know, watched or viewed or sponsored. And I don't know.
Yeah. That plus, like, love people the way that he loved them. You know what I mean? Because sometimes when we get so, like, clinging on to our beliefs, we don't do the other side of that well, which is the loving side of it. I think that was really powerful to see, like, how many people he impacted and how consistent his message was.
Yeah, I think, like, seeing him, one of the things we talked about before in the podcast was seeing him on one of the late night shows talking to Joan Rivers, and, like, his interaction with her where he just sung the I Like You Just the Way You Are song, and she was just, like, torn to shreds.
It's you I like.
Right. And just the understanding of, like, just his deep beliefs about who God is and who we are as a result of who God is and what he thinks about us, and how that just permeated his whole life. And to see that, like, example after example after example of people who came in contact with him, that was their experience. Was like, holy, like, he's actually he's looking at me and talking to me. That was cool.
I think that was one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was just his, like, desire to affirm human dignity, and, like, it was just so powerful. I think even, like, towards the end there, not to be weird, but it's almost like in this movie, like, God was affirming my humanity in the end of it. Like, I I was reading this verse a few days ago, and it struck me because it's something I'm struggling with right now. And it's the verse where it's in Isaiah 43 where he talks about, like, you're precious to me and honored, and I love you. And I think that just came to mind at the end of this movie and the end of just thinking about what this man was all about doing. And I love that they didn't make him out to be a perfect man either. Like, they showed that he had different sides, like, because I think sometimes when we value someone and something that we've done, we, like, tend to, like, whitewash isn't the right word, but you know what I mean? We tend to, like, only see and like, lift up how, oh, I got to be like this person because they were perfect. But no, he wasn't. But he still, like, consistently really, I think he really got that, and he really, like, lived that out really well.
Yeah, one of the things that he said was that he loved children as they were and not for who they would be. So, you know, not your occupation or what sport you'll be good at, and et cetera. And I thought that was really special and just got me excited to be in the classroom this fall. And I got teary-eyed thinking about it, like, okay, how can I love my 21 students so that they feel loved for who they are and not who I want them to be? Because I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but I know for teaching, sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in, like, I just want you to be this way, or if you just did this, it would make all of our lives easier, or if I could teach you this, then you could be good at this. And how terrifying that can be for a child, because I think he even said, I don't want you to be a grown-up, because that can be scary. And so how to, like, love a child and allow them to know that it's okay to be a child, and I love you for being a child, which I thought was pretty crazy. And he talked about growing up how he was afraid to show emotions or to be a bad boy or to get angry. And so I don't know, it just got me both nervous because I'm like, I can't be Mr. Rogers in my classroom because he's pretty big shoes to fill, but excited and pumped to be like, okay, what is God gonna do this year, and what I get to be a part of, and loving a group of kids just the way they are.
Yeah, I think we did this, like, there's just, like, this weird timing of this too, because we're part of a little church plant called the Neighborhood Church. No affiliation with Mr. Rogers. Officially.
Maybe
anyways.
a little bit.
Not officially.
Affiliation.
We reached out to his people and they denied us. But this summer we're taking, like, a little dive into the idea of hospitality and of being a good neighbor to people. And all of, like, it was not planned that this movie would come out at this time or any of that, but just, like, the moment of kind of taking a deeper dive into, like, okay, how does God actually want us to be neighbors to people? Even today I was looking at the verses in Luke that we're talking about when there was, like, a teacher of the law who was challenging Jesus, and he was saying, well, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus tells the story that we all know of the Good Samaritan, but just this whole idea of, like, what does it actually mean to be a good neighbor? And one of the things I've come away with that is really reaffirmed in this movie is almost every relationship that we have, like normal relationships in America, are transactional, meaning you do this for me and I do this for you. If you don't do this for me, I don't do this for you. There's an expectation of this isn't unconditional. There's conditions in place. Almost every single relationship. Very, 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 even a lot of family relationships are that way. Very, very, very few relationships are without condition. But what hospitality is the extension of an unconditional love and acceptance that we get from God to other people. That's what hospitality is. And, like, that's what he was doing. It was, you don't have to change. I love you just the way you are. And that is the foundational thing that he says in the movie. All growth and change comes out of that.
Something else I really like. You kind of said it, Mia, but you kind of misquoted it.
Okay, correct me.
But I only know that because it hit me hard. But just him and his wife saying when they were children that they weren't allowed. It's not that he didn't know how to. Well, he didn't because he wasn't allowed
Right.
to be mad. I think is
I
what he
said
said.
he was afraid to. Not he didn't know how.
Okay. We'll go back and check the
true.
tapes. And we'll replay it right now. And then we'll see what's right. But no, that really hit home to me because I was like, wow, that's my childhood. And that there was no place for being mad or being anything other than okay and good. and happy.
Yeah.
And it drove me insane for obvious reasons. But then to think through how that actually affects you growing up, and what do you do with that? Where do you have outlets for that healthy? Was it, you don't have any examples for that to look, you know? And it's just interesting. His came out in puppets, and I'm like, what weird ways are mine coming out? You know,
Yours are also puppets.
oh
Yeah.
right.
He has a puppet in his hand right now. FYI.
Okay.
Jeremy, put the puppet away.
Sorry, guys. But yeah, I thought that was just a really good starting point to think about that. And then another thing, towards the end, after 9/11, when he came on for a special, I don't know if it was Greek or Latin. I probably should know. He said something, but he says, "We are repairers of creation." I thought that was a really cool phrase, thinking like, okay, if we're repairers of creation, what are we repairing? What are we focusing on? What's our mission? Not that it's all the same generally speaking, but what is our specific focus? What is our church community focus? What is our family's focus? You know, whatever, communities you're in.
It almost becomes as simple as like, you know, me and Lady D. I think I've made up 3 different nicknames for you today.
I liked all of them.
Okay, good.
So.
We'll workshop them and figure out which
Okay,
one's going to
great.
stick. We were talking on the way here just about like purpose being so foundationally important. And it's like if you are struggling with purpose and you don't know a next step, going off of what you just said, the phrase is like, find the brokenness around you and do something about it.
Yeah.
Like that's such a simple and profound thing to do. And you don't have to have it all figured out, and you don't have to have some world-changing plan that you've seen all the way through. But it's like, what is the brokenness that you see around you, and do something about it.
Yeah. And often that can just be a person.
Yeah.
Like a person you interact with where it's so easy to see the ways that people need to have their humanity affirmed. The fact that they bear God's image and they have value just because of who they are, not because of what they can produce or that transactional thing that you can have with another person. I mean, there's even just small things. Like, those things are all around us. But one other thing that stuck out to me, this is a total left turn from what I was just saying, was the part when they talked about, like, he was looking at, like, television at the time and how, like, people were viewing children as consumers, and how do they, like, get them to consume more?
Mm-hmm.
And just the idea that, like, he didn't want to feed into that. He wanted them to be, like, affirm their humanity potentially so they could be repairers, not consumers.
Yeah.
And that's such a different way to live. Like, I need to have all my needs met. I need to make sure I'm being taken care of. I want, versus, like, no, my purpose really is, like, I'm here to be a repairer, a restorer.
Mm.
And as I do that, I get restored too.
That's an interesting question, though, that I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts. Because I do think it's both and.
Yeah.
And it might be a little bit of a what came first, chicken or the egg question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've honestly been thinking about this recently, where I've always thought that you have to know your identity before you can actually do something. So, like, I would have to know that God is for me, repairing me, so that I can repair, offer something for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just said is different, and something I'm starting to think maybe that is actually the way it works, is that as you start to pursue repairing someone else, you see your own brokenness. Therefore, you try to get affirmed in lots of ways, but until God affirms you, that you can't expose that unless you're actively moving towards that. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, if repairing is the word, by going out and seeking to repair people, you're going to find yourself as a broken person and not enough. But then God comes in and affirms that, repairing that in you. But I always have been thinking before this is like, I can't go and actually give something of worth until I'm affirmed myself. Does that make sense? What do y'all think about that?
I get a little nervous when we talk about repairing other people, because for me that, like, and in my life I've thought this, like, I need to fix other people, and I can't do that. So I don't think that's what you're saying, but that's like what I get nervous about talking like that a little bit. I'm like a little apprehensive.
Sure.
Yeah, but I do think there can be a tendency to, a hesitancy to do anything when we think like, well, I don't have it. Like, I'm garbage. I don't have anything to offer.
Right.
I don't have it all together. Like, what could I possibly do to help someone else?
Totally.
And not realizing that, like, you actually have a lot of just intrinsic value and worth that you have to offer. And you don't have to have it all together to do something. You don't have to have it all together to make a difference and make an impact. But I agree. I like being careful with the language of, it gets overwhelming when you think I have to fix other people. And like, I'm so broken. How do I fix someone else? And that's never the mission that God gave us, was to fix other people. It was to be fixed and to tell other people about the fixer. And
But there's more than that, right?
sure, yeah,
For sure.
Like, yeah, that's the
seeing
main,
brokenness and doing something about it, right?
Sure. But I guess my thing is, where this all spurred from was just seeing so many Christians on the sideline.
Yeah.
No, totally.
And we live in a culture where we're just taking in, not feeling that we have enough yet. So taking in, but then we're, overeducated, over theologicalized, or if that's not a word, I don't know. But then just being like, wow, in Orlando, I know for a fact there's so many Christians that aren't doing anything, and not to blame them or whatever, but I actually want to ask them, like, what are you waiting for? Like, like Dylan's saying, you have something to give.
Right.
You have something to pour out to, like, a desert.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, well, I'm just not there. I need more. That's kind of where this question is coming from. Does that make sense? Which is
Totally.
kind of going with Mr. Rogers, because he's constantly affirming you.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, comes back to that consumerism that he was even getting at, was like, we are so trained to consume in like every aspect of our culture, that the idea, and that includes like, unfortunately, there's a lot of that has infiltrated the church, and the church has actually built itself on consumerism. Like, hey, let's take the things that we've learned in the business world and the marketing world, and let's apply them to the church. What could possibly go wrong? And we have made consumers of people that think, well, my job is just to come and consume, not realizing that, like, that was never the plan Jesus had. The plan Jesus had was if you just look at the language of the kingdom, which we talk about a lot in our community, the language of the kingdom is radical pouring out, radical other-centeredness, radical love and service. And those things actually create the kingdom and build it up at the same time. So, like, another thing that we were talking about on the way here was just like the desire to live in the kingdom, and the way that we would define it in our community is just like things as they should be. And it's never perfect here and now, but it's what Jesus came to establish and what he's building towards. It's things as they should be. And we want that, man. I want that for me. I want that for my family. But to get that requires not learning a bunch of things, but radical acts of service and love and generosity. And that's the only way you get it, and that's the only way you experience it.
And it costs you something.
It does. It costs you a lot of
costly.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, the language that Jesus always talks about the kingdom is, it costs you tremendously.
Everything. It costs you everything.
But it's so,
Yeah.
it's, the scales are so tipped in your favor for what you get that it's so worth it.
Yeah.
I think jumping back a little bit too towards what Jeremy was saying about people in Orlando. Just that's where we live. We're not picking on Orlando, but Christians kind of sitting on the sideline. And I've kind of been thinking and wrestling with God a little bit on that too. And I think a huge thing that God has taught me in these last couple of years is that I can't be anyone's fixer or Holy Spirit. Like, it's not my job to get them riled up. And just from like observation or like doing life with friends who I would maybe unfairly, but to say that they were sitting on the sidelines, I think they're almost numb and comfortable to their own stories, where they don't necessarily believe that their stories hold enough brokenness or anything like phenomenal in strength to jump into other people's lives or to do life with them in a difficult way. And being comfortable kind of gets addicting. And I've kind of had a few friends say, I'm just taking the season off, or I'm not going to church, or I'm just taking a break from God. But the sad thing about that is it's kind of, you don't get to just sit idle. You just kind of slowly start rolling back on the hill.
Kind of like the one we're on.
Kind of like the one we're on.
Literally.
Literally.
We're parked on a hill, y'all.
If you didn't get that.
Yeah. But one of my favorite quotes from an author that I really like, who talks a lot about suffering, is named Bob Sorge, and he has a bunch of stuff about Job, but one of his little simple quotes is, God could have left Job alone, and he says that in almost God was gracious to attack Job's life and do what he did because Job was comfortable. He loved God, but he was comfortable, which for me in a season of suffering was really hard to hear, because I was like, well, that doesn't seem like a loving God. That seems like, if I'm Job, then yeah, leave me alone.
Mr. Rogers wouldn't do that.
Exactly. But I think, so I've been struggling too. Christians on the sideline, because I want the best for my friends. And I'm like, I want God to rock your world, and I want you to be living fully with God. But I think a huge thing that he's been teaching me is that only he can do it. Like, I had a friend who's kind of been in that area of wrestling with how much of this whole God thing do I want, or it seems uncomfortable and scary. And then she just kind of randomly started texting me and was like, oh my gosh, I had this Holy Spirit moment. And then the next day she was like, this is crazy, but it happened again. And then she texted me and she's like, I just called my mom and had this conversation that was like really scary, and I told her these hard truths. And I'm like, I should probably call my mom and say the same thing, but I'm not going to, because that sounds terrifying. And I think God just kind of like lifted this veil off of me and was like, see, when I put my hand on people, they'll move and do big things. But for me, it can be frustrating because I'm like, get off the sidelines. But God, I think, has been gracious in being like, love you, Mia, but you can't actually do this.
Yeah. And we don't know. Like, there's seasons of life where people should be on the sidelines. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a 6, so literally all the time in my head is this pendulum of the devil's advocate. Well, but what about this? But what about this? And so I think that's the reality, is like, we can't know what other people are going through. And I also think, like, we've been talking about this where I work, like, oftentimes people need permission. And even Jesus gave permission. Do you know what I mean? Like, he even said, like, I've done this already. Now you're going to do this. And I think sometimes because we become consumers, we just, like, consume. I giggled earlier when you were talking about this, Jeremy, because I was like, we're just a bunch of fatties. A bunch of spiritual fatties. And we forget, like, you know, we have permission. Jesus has already given it to us. But I think sometimes we forget that we have it. And I think that was the thing about the movie and about, like, Mr. Rogers' message is, like, you were created and you bear God's image. You have dignity. You have value. You have something to offer. You have permission to take steps in that. And yeah, there's going to be seasons of life where the ish hits the fan, and you're going to need to recalibrate and recalculate and rest and really, really be rooted and grounded in that love that God has for you, that love that you were created in. Because if you're not rooted in that, then it just becomes a bunch of, like, steps to follow. And my life has been a pendulum swing of that, back and forth, to the point where, like, I had to stop what I was doing because I literally had no relationship with God. I was just doing things for him. And so if we're not rooted and established in, like, why we were created and how much God loves us, like, that we really are precious to him, like, that word just seems so tender and, like, intimate, I guess. And it's so powerful to think about that, even in our messy brokenness, that he still views us that way. And he still looks at us and says, you matter. I love you just the way you are. That doesn't mean that he's not going to grow us and change us or call us out of that. But that season or whatever, you know, things in our life that are, you know, broken. But his love for us is still true and strong and intense, even in our messiness and our pain, and the fact that he reminds us, like, this was something else we were talking about earlier too, is like, when everyone around you prospers, you prosper. It's not a competition. It's not an either or. In God's economy, like, there isn't a scarcity of resources. So you can let go of your need to prosper and seek the prosperity of other people, and actually then you're going to prosper because I've got you, because you're precious to me and you're mine and I call you by name. That's why you can let go of that.
Yeah. A lot of this is, like, so foundational for, like, this little Live Alive podcasts and thinking, and it's like what began all of it was this idea of like it's not about a bunch of rules and a bunch of steps and all this stuff. Like what we're actually chasing and what we want to spur other people onto is joy. Like that's what Jesus was, for the joy set before him. He did his hardest ministry, the hardest things he came to do was for joy. It wasn't to earn anything. It wasn't to impress people. It wasn't to be a really good person. It was for joy. And like that being the motivating thing, like when we are actually hospitable to people, when we actually go out of our comfort zones, we love people in unconditional ways, we get tremendous amounts of joy from that, tremendous amounts of purpose from that. And that's that tasting and seeing that God is good, and it draws you deeper in, and it makes you want more of it. Not, this is what the Bible says, so shame on you for not doing it. And, you know, you're gonna, there's just so much, there's so much like shame tactics that have come up in the church. And what we want to call people to is like, for the joy set before you, that's everything Jesus said and did and wants you to do is for the joy set before you.
Well, the only shame is that it's a shame that you don't get to experience real joy.
Yeah, you just get stuck.
I mean, that's when we shame people, that sounds like a terrible phrase. It is a terrible phrase. Yeah. But the shame is really just a broken heart towards someone being like, man, you're not experiencing real joy. And that's terrible. I want you to experience that, because I totally hear what you're saying, Lady D. And, but there's just something in me.
Queen D?
Queen D?
Ooh. I like it.
Keep going.
I don't that.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I don't know. There's this fuzzy line that I'm trying to walk my own self through. But it is like the identity, like what your identity is, does spur you on to just be joyous and kind and loving and content. But when you see friends and people you know that they're just not experiencing joy like they could be, you almost get like jealous for them to like, no, you should be experiencing joy, and I hate seeing you not.
Yeah, I think that's actually like what a righteous anger is.
Yeah, totally.
Like I've felt that a few times in my life where I'm like, I'm not a quick to angry person, but sometimes I find myself just like seething with anger, and I'm like, that's what this is. Like, I'm mad that you are believing lies or that you're stuck in some terrible situation and you're not experiencing life as you actually could. Like that makes me angry. And I think that is a righteous anger, because it's an anger that's actually fueled by love, not by hatred for somebody.
Totally.
And man, it's powerful, but it can be very frustrating if we fall back onto, well, I'm the type of person who wants to fix everything. I'm like a helper, and I'm like, so when I come across those situations, it bums me out, because I'm like, I can fix it. And then I'm like, well, no, I can't. And whenever something grates against that part of my personality, it's like so disheartening. But it has to cause me to go back before King Jesus and just be like, help. You have to do this. I want to help everyone, because I think it's who you made me as a reflection of who you are. But you didn't make me this way so that I actually would fix everything. Because that's not, that burden is overwhelming. So guys, how do we want to finish this? It was going to be a mini episode. It was going to be a mini episode, but we made it like a real one.
Wow. I didn't know it was going to be mini.
Well, I just thought it would be, because we've never done a Live Alive movie review. We'll just do this every week.
In a car on a hill.
Jurassic World.
Next week is Jurassic World.
Amazing.
Ooh, how does that connect?
We're going to draw out the Live Alive themes of an insane dinosaur movie.
Staying alive in the midst of chaos. Go ahead.
Just before we end, I wanted to really touch and just kind of speak to the dreamers and the creators.
Do it.
Because I think that's what Mr. Rogers was. And watching it, I was just inspired, because I love to create things, and it almost made me antsy, because I was like, I want to get out of this theater and start creating things.
You just ran out halfway through.
Yeah, I did. You guys just
made everyone scared. Everyone's looking around like, should we run?
She came back with a new outfit that she had made.
Yep, mixtape. But I think something that was really encouraging about Mr. Rogers' life was how intentionally slow he almost was. That he thought he was going to go to seminary, but then decided to do TV for a little bit, and then took a break, went back to seminary, came back, did children's stuff, stopped to do adult stuff that didn't go as planned. It wasn't as great as he wanted it to be, and then ended up coming back to children's TV. And I just thought that was both really inspiring, that you can take it slow and you don't have to have this one path of creation and to stick to it, but also how intentional he was and how careful he was to invest into the things that he loved and was passionate about, which was inspiring to me. And it also made me want to be less of a consumer. I just kind of had this moment where I was like, if I want to create good things, I have to consume less, because Mr. Rogers, like, he wasn't a consumer. He was disgusted by consuming, and so
And he hated TV.
He hated TV. I was like, if I want to create better material, I need to spend less time on Instagram. Honestly, that's like what I thought of, because it's dulling me and it's almost like dumbing my creativity down. And I love Instagram because I love seeing what other creators are doing. And so part of me is like, but I need it to create what I love creating. But yeah, I was just inspired. I definitely think that if you weren't planning on seeing it already from our review, and you're just someone who loves to create and be creative, see it for that alone, because he was a sensational creator.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to the last thing, I want to say this too. What is our rating system?
Everyone gets 3 last things before the last thing.
Because I really have one too.
No, but I wanted to say, what is the Live Alive rating system for movies?
Ooh. It's not Rotten Tomatoes, because I believe that's been taken. I don't know, like how many tomatoes you'd give something or whatever.
Like, are we doing it by stages of life?
Wait, what?
Like, if you're dead, it's a awful movie.
Oh,
You're
no.
born, it's awesome.
If you're a zombie, that's like 1.
It did only get one bad review, if that's helpful.
I don't think that's it, so let's keep
Keep workshopping that.
Baby, for that be the highest then? If dead is
Is
lowest?
this Benjamin?
Oh,
Benjamin
yeah.
Buttons?
Or is it a
New
Benjamin
life.
Button? Where it's a wrinkly little baby that gets better and better.
I think this is getting dicey.
Yeah.
Can we do stars? I mean, it's kind of trite, but
You're
it
so
works.
American.
I know. I know.
Anybody have any ideas for the rating system?
What could be like a
It's tough.
I just
It's
wanna
tough to
make it
just
Mr.
make up a rating system.
Mr. Rogers? Well, wait, can I just pause for a second and say I love that the lady with all the puppet with all the rouge on her cheeks was his sister.
Yeah, that was pretty great.
That was funny.
It sounds like she had it coming.
Yeah, it does. But still, it was my favorite because she was the scariest one. Like, that's the one I have memories of from childhood, being like, "What was up with that puppet?" Yikes. Okay. Anyways, back to this.
All right, we'll do 1 to 5 neighbors for this one.
Okay.
1 neighbor meaning don't go see it. 5 neighbors meaning you got to get to the theater right now.
Okay.
Are we each doing it?
Yes.
Okay.
5.
Queen D. Oh.
Oh no.
I just 5.
5 neighbors.
5 neighbors.
Okay.
I want to say like 50 neighbors, but I feel like that's not right, so I'll say 5.
50 neighbors?
50 neighbors. Take 10 of your friends to go see this movie. That's what I'm
That's-
telling you to do.
That's Queen D's review.
Yes.
Don't just go. Bring all of your neighbors.
Yes.
Man, I really liked it. I'm going to say 5 as well. I think you got to go see it.
So I'm feeling peer pressure here, but I'm going to
No,
say
be your own
4
person.
neighbors.
Get
Okay.
out. Oh,
Just open the back.
shame.
You are not my
Pop the trunk. Pop the
trunk.
Roll right out.
Hello, stranger. Yeah, I mean, it was great. I'm just leaving room because I think it was a really good movie, but a 5 is just the highest compliment you can.
5
It's
neighbors
true.
of this rating system we literally just invented.
I know.
That means if there's 4 neighbors, that means there's 1 stranger. So you give it four neighbors, 1 stranger.
That one won't be your neighbor. Just the 4.
Okay, so the final exercise is
Oh wait,
I just have a thought for the final exercise, but you can totally say no.
sure.
I really like the question the movie ended with, but I don't know if we want to give it away because it was really powerful. But I think
That's
that would
true.
be a great way to end it. But I'm also, not married to it.
okay. Well, let's say this: if you don't want spoilers for how the movie ends, then turn it off right now,
Turn this off
because we're
now.
gonna end it with the question that the movie kind of
Yeah,
ends with.
so go do something else.
So
other
just
than
turn
this.
it off.
Go to the movie.
Throw your phone
Go
out
get
the
10 of your
window.
neighbors and go to this movie.
Go
right
get
now.
4 neighbors and 1 stranger and go
Yes.
see the movie. If you're okay, or if you've already seen the movie, or you're okay with a little bit of a tiny spoiler, that you can keep listening, and we'll do that final question exercise.
Excellent.
Do you want to set it up, Shirk?
Sure. So,
I'm so glad you didn't ask me.
basically, we're going to take 1 minute. Who's going to get the timer? We're going to take 1 minute and think about someone or someones who got you to this point in your life, that helped you along the way, that guided you, that pulled you through tough times, but that was really a foundational, rock-solid piece of your life. And we're going to take 1 minute
To think about who that is.
to think about
And
it.
kind of the prompting he gave too was someone who you knew had your best interest in mind and actually demonstrated love to you.
And it's going to be dead 1 minute.
Dead 1 minute.
So you at home need to be doing the same thing if you want to follow along.
All right, here we go. Starting now.
So who'd y'all think about? Princess D.
I've been demoted. What happened in that 1 minute?
The Duchess of D.
Ooh, that's fun too.
Empress D.
I thought about my grandpa. It's the same person I thought about in the movie, but I was crying a lot when that happened. He was just like my life when I was a short person, aka a child, was very hard sometimes. And I could go into that, but that would take a long time. But I'll just say that my grandfather was like the one. I might cry. FYI, this might be tears happening. He was the one constant that showed me like unconditional love. Like I knew that he loved me, and I'm crying. I never had to do anything to perform or earn his love. And that was so powerful, especially from the environment that I was in most of the time. So for me, like, that was huge. Okay, I cried. It happened.
Thanks,
Cleaned
D.
you out. You're welcome.
I think for me, it was my mom, the person I thought about in there when they were talking. Like, no one else in my life has shown that unconditional love like my mom, where it's like, no matter what, there's no question in my mind that she will do whatever needs to be done to make sure that I am cared for and that all my needs are met. There's just no question. There's no doubt. She's always been there. And I've never had a moment of my life where I've been like, well, does she? Like, even when I'm like snuck out of the house and got caught, or like I'm nearly getting suspended from school or anything, it's like, there's never a moment where I'm like, well, this is the end, where she doesn't love me anymore. And yeah, that's just it's powerful to experience that love, and it's devastating to not experience that love. And you know, the thing that makes me the most hits me the most emotionally, like when I think of God, is when I think he loves me more than that. Like, that's when it always hits me. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's nothing I can do to like outpace that love.
I thought of my Nana, and for a lot of the similar reasons that you thought of your grandpa. I had parents that loved me a lot, but I was born basically like in the middle of a divorce, plus they were just very young, and so growing up we didn't have a lot of money, and it was kind of craziness, and my Nana was like that one piece of conditional love who was so sweet. And it didn't even really dawn on me growing up, but the elementary school that I went to was pretty low income, and so all of my classmates were, as was I in my home. But my Nana like just always believed in sharing resources with me like I was her own child, and so I grew up with piano lessons and art lessons and braces and going to the opera and ballet and like all these things that I didn't realize that the other kids in my classroom weren't going to. And she just always supplied like all of these art supplies for me. And I remember even before I could, because I really like to write now, but before I could write my own words, I used to make picture books and draw, and I would bring the books to her and she would write in the words that I wrote for me. And she was the first one to ever call me a writer. And so sweet little things like that where I don't think I realized until I was older, because she passed when I was in high school, of how much I wouldn't have been the person that I am and love this, and was exposed to so many things that I love now if it wasn't for her investing into me like she did.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
I was thinking, who has been Mr. Rogers to me? And I think the first adults that unconditionally loved me for who I was were my friend's parents, Wink and Raina. Before that, and even after that, I was kind of like Peter Pan my whole childhood. I just lived in Never Never Land. I created my own environments and all that stuff. But they were Christians. They're basically my spiritual parents. And they loved me for who I was long before I even became a Christian. And just cared for me and brought me in. And I mean, really, it was in the same vein of Mr. Rogers. They affirmed me, and just they really liked me, and they just thought I was great, even when I wasn't great. But I think that was world changing for me. So, who was y'all's listening? You should let us know. And rate us 1 to 5 neighbors for this review of our first movie.
I give this one 5 strangers.
Wait, are they rating our review
Yes.
of the review?
They're rating our review of the review with the same rating system. This is actually just a universal rating system.
Okay.
So when you
We've started a craze among the nation.
next time you take an Uber, if you're not happy, just say like, "You're 5 strangers," and just get out. Don't explain it; they'll get it.
Don't even close the door to the
this
car.
podcast is listened to by literally millions of people. So
Millions or billions?
or almost to billions.
Yeah, don't
Almost
sell
to
yourself
billions.
short.
All right. Well, good review, y'all. I'll see y'all next Friday.
I wish we all knew the words to the song so we could sing it.
Won't you be?
My neighbor.
My neighbor.
You please, won't you please, please won't you be my neighbor?
Bye.